At some point, you have to talk about the Tarrasque in the room, right?
I'm Nerdarchy Ted.
And I'm Nerdarchy Dave.
Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds by
nerds.
All right, so I think it's kind of obvious what we're talking about today.
Well, at some point, you have to talk about the Tarrasque in the room, right? And it was very rude of himself to not introduce himself.
Yeah, but, despite how awesome the Tarrasque is, this one's a little bit quiet.
He's a little bit quiet, and also the Tarrasque in 5e D&D is a little less than awesome, which is really disappointing in the sense that Whiz Kids actually made a freaking terrific, awesome, amazing mini.
Indeed.
Now, Wizards of the Coast and Whiz Kids often send us stuff for free, which is really cool. And, sometimes we talk about the stuff, sometimes we don't. A lot of times we'll offer it up as giveaways for the fans. But this guy actually did not come for free. Somebody actually had to spend their hard-earned money on it.
I couldn't pass this up. As awesome a mini as this is, had to have it for the collection. And when I, contacted Whiz Kids, they were all out of samples, so I had to just, shell out the cash.
Yeah. And so he looks fantastic. And, if you were to plop this mini on your table and then use the Tarrasque outside of the monster manual, I just don't feel like the experience at the table is going to match the presence of this monster that's getting slapped down.
So, the presence, to an aspect is there. Like, their frightful presence, is there. And as big a mini as this is, versus the size of an actual, medium-sized character, it is terrifying.
So, where do you want to start first? Do we want to go over the strengths and weaknesses of the Tarrasque? Do we want to go over the actual problem of the Tarrasque and then go into the strengths and weaknesses and then our fix?
This was your foray, so why don't you guide us down this path?
I want to say you started this whole mess by producing this awesome mini and making it appear on the table, right? So first of all, one of the things we want to talk about is how cool the Tarrasque looks and how it's been throughout the editions, but the 5e experience doesn't really match it. We've even done several mock battles on the channel as like kind of actual plays, and again, time and time again, they just prove the Tarrasque doesn't really hold up. Even when you're just running the math of the Tarrasque, it doesn't really hold up. So we're going to go over, the strengths and weaknesses of the Tarrasque as it is. Our thoughts on running the Tarrasque, and maybe some things to improve the experience of the Tarrasque at the table, so it's not a cakewalk.
Indeed. All right, so for starters, let's look at the challenge rating. It's a challenge rating 30, which that's only one of 4 challenge rating 30 monsters currently available for the game.
Not only is it one of 4, 2 of them are Tiamat, right? So it's not even like there's a huge variety. 2 of them are Tiamat, one of them is Baphomet, and then you have Bahamut, not Baphomet, Bahamut, and then you have the Tarrasque itself, right? So, when you compare, those monsters side by side with the Tarrasque, you'll find that the Tarrasque is a little underwhelming in comparison.
And when you do look at that kind of side-by-side comparison, you do have to take into account that the Tarrasque was straight out of the original monster manual set how many years ago?
Yeah.
So, they've had time to kind of play around and figure out exactly what a Challenge 30 truly looks like. So with that, do you feel the Tarrasque needs some help?
Well, first of all, if you do a quick, here's how the Tarrasque was in previous editions, one of the things was, you couldn't just kill the Tarrasque. You had to kill it and then wish it dead in order for it to actually die. I believe it's either its horns or its claws were considered weapons of wounding. So, they were hard to heal.
I pretty much, if I remember correctly, its claws were like swords of sharpness and its teeth were vorpal blades.
No, there was wounding and sharpness.
Okay.
The teeth were, so I believe it was actually wounding and sharpness, and so you could die from a Tarrasque from one attack with a good attack roll from the DM, which made it super impressive. When you combine that with needing a wish spell, the Tarrasque was no joke, and it was very hard to kill.
So with that, does the strength of the Tarrasque, on average having 676 hit points, does that measure up with, editions of the past?
As far as the hit points, it's probably on par or close enough, in comparison to the older edition monsters, because also the players didn't have as much hit points as they do in later editions. They didn't do as much damage as they did in later editions as well.
So next up is the Frightful Presence, which is a DC 17 Wisdom save, or be frightened of him. Which, if you know fear, you can't approach, you can't go closer to said monster.
Also, disadvantage if you try to attack it directly, right? As long as it's in your line of sight, so it does complicate things.
Yeah. And next up is the Reflective Carapace.
So Reflective Carapace is interesting. So there's a couple things. One, magic missiles just doesn't work on it, is one thing. And the other thing is anything requires a spell attack doesn't work on it. And anything that's a line effect doesn't work on it. So at first this kind of sounded a lot, but I started doing the math and going through. And really, it's not as much immunity to spells as you think it is. It does have the extra benefit of it is a reflective carapace. So if you make a die roll, there's a chance that it gets bounced back at you.
Which I have to say completely and utterly negates that whole I'm going to play a warlock and I'm just going to push the thing away, because Eldritch Blast is an attack roll. Eldritch Blast never does damage to a Tarrasque, period.
Yeah, I don't know if it could still push it, but it definitely doesn't hurt it. I have seen the memes where they talk about, killing the Tarrasque using Acid Splash because it's not immune to acid and it requires a saving throw. And actually, the Tarrasque doesn't have a great dex save.
Right. So that is there's still ways out there. I'm not trying to negate all the different chatter, but I've seen countless talk about a single warlock with Eldritch Blast could take out a Tarrasque, and and that's just a straight up no.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen that one. I've seen the Flying Wizard with Acid Splash though. So essentially, Reflective Carapace makes the Tarrasque immune to 43 spells out of all the spell lists.
That's pretty impressive to just be like, yeah, I don't have to worry about those.
It's helpful, but I don't think it's quite enough. Honestly, I don't think it's as quite impressive as the Rakshasa. That's like, oh, it's a 5th level or lower spell. Nah, I don't think so.
And we are talking about a deadlier beast than a Rakshasa that both of them technically continually come back, because there's always a Tarrasque somewhere, and Rakshasas are demons, so they just go back to their dimension if you kill them. So the Tarrasque comes in at a whopping 5 attacks a round with a whopping 29.6 average damage per attack, between its claws, its bite, its tail, and horns. That's a lot. It's coming in at a plus 19 to hit, which even if you are getting your armor class up to a staggering 30, that's still a 50-50 chance, and most characters are not coming in at that kind of high. We've seen and talked about high AC builds, but for the Tarrasque, it's not really a big deal.
Yeah, and basically the damage is between 0 and 148 a round. If it actually gets a bite on you and has you grappled, that jumps to 0 to 204 points of damage a round, which is significant. You could kill quite a few characters in one round, but the Tarrasque probably isn't going to be able to level all of its attacks against one attacker at a time, especially if it has something grappled in its mouth. It's not like it can horn them or claw them while it's grappled. And also it's generally going to swallow them anyway, which then also adds a little bit more damage.
So if you go with a Hill Dwarf Barbarian in kind of comparison, you max out your Constitution, you have the tough feat, you can get your hit points up to a massive 345. That's several rounds of combat standing alone against this beast.
Yeah, and also you could double those hit points essentially, because you're gonna get your Barbarian Rage and you're gonna resist. So yeah, that Barbarian could actually go toe to toe by himself against the Tarrasque for quite a while before the Tarrasque would eventually kill them.
Right. So that kind of ends our strengths portion, which, again, is considerable for such an amazing creature. But now we got to kind of look at what's the weaknesses written on the page.
Yeah, so the problem with the weaknesses, it's not that it has a ton of weaknesses, but the ones that it has are very exploitable.
And that first one is there's no ranged attack. And since we know that there's a lot of players of Dungeons & Dragons, and thus DMs, that have never played before, that don't look past what is written in the words of the book, you just like, oh, it doesn't have a ranged attack, which means it can't.
Yeah.
So, like, it is huge. For an experienced GM, there are ways to move beyond this. But, for many GMs, it's all right, it's not there, it doesn't have it.
The Tarrasque actually exasperates this problem on its own anyway, because if it's successful with its closest thing to a ranged attack, its frightful presence, and it actually drives its enemies further away from it, meaning they're further out of range and it can't hurt them.
So next up is its speed. When you look at many of the classes and subclasses that get speed boosts, you can easily outpace a 40. So if you're looking to kind of play around and like just outrange the thing, you can totally do so with this, with this style. So that definitely, no ranged attack and a slow speed, it's just going to be running circles, around, the battlefield trying to hit something.
Yeah, your monks, your barbarians, they're all fast characters. There's subclasses that add to your speed. There's races that have increased speed. So it's really not that hard to stay out of range of the Tarrasque, with these. And that's not even getting into magic items from spells.
Indeed. We talked about the reflective carapace being a strength for the Tarrasque, but there are cantrips that are saving throws, not attack rolls, like Acid Splash or Sacred Flame, that if you can outrange a la, Flying Broom or Flying Carpet, by raw, what's written in the book, you can be away from the creature and just keep going until you bring it down.
Yeah, and they're damage types too, that either they only have resistance or no resistance at all. So, basically you can just whittle them away.
And that's a little disappointing for something that's supposed to be like a legendary creature, like a single magic item and a weak ass caster. Just be like, all right, I got this. Give me a few days.
Yeah, you don't need mighty heroes. You just need enough flying carpets or brooms of flying and first level casters.
So that kind of sums up, the strengths and weaknesses of such a creature. How do we fix the problem?
All right, so there's a bunch of things, like mechanically, there's things that we can do to it, or tactically, there's things we can do in order to make our Tarrasque more effective.
All right, where would you start?
So I believe you broached the subject of possibly giving it a roar attack so it could, maybe do some thunder damage or even psychic damage.
When you've got a creature that is essentially larger than many buildings of the time, like, all right, yeah, it's not as big as a castle, but it's larger than most usual dwellings where people live. So yeah, this creature, this awesome beast of legend, should absolutely have something. And you've seen movies where something roars so loud, like people are bleeding from the ears. It's totally a cool thunder damage type situation to me. And I'd be down for psychic too if you wanted to go in that direction, but I would go thunder.
Yeah, so my thought is, and I'm actually just reading, I'm happen to reading a book now with like Eldritch horrors in it, where they like speak into the minds of other creatures, and just their mere presence makes them bleed out of all their orifices, essentially, just because they're so hard. And the Tarrasque is such a legendary and unique monster. I feel like it could have an ability similar to that, where it's not so much that you're not taking damage from the sound, but it just destroys your psyche and ego and causes so much fear. It's actually the fear itself is killing you.
That's pretty hard.
So to me, that kind of sounds like psychic damage.
That could be psychic. That could be necrotic. I mean, it's literally, eating away at you. That's definitely odd to go in that direction, but I could see it. Another direction would easily be as big as this thing is, as sharp as the claws are supposed to be on this. I see no problem with it reaching into the ground and just picking up a massive boulder, hunk of dirt and what have you, and just lobbing it away. These things are designed to just tear through earth, ground, buildings, what have you. So if it doesn't have a ranged weapon, it just picks one up off the ground and chucks it. And you could have it out to a considerable range. And if you just look at the threat level of what this thing is, it totally makes sense. This thing should be a siege engine in and of itself. So that works for me.
Yeah, there's a couple routes you can go. One, you can just look at giants, right, and be like, what giant has the closest strength to a Tarrasque? I think the Tarrasque could probably hurl something like that, because actually the Tarrasque is probably stronger than the strongest giant. But it's not going to be as skilled with throwing, hurling rocks and boulders. But I think it's going to overcompensate by being that much stronger. So if you've ever watched any monster movies with kaijus and giant creatures in it, they always wreck, whatever's near them. They're always using improvised weapons. So if this happens somewhere like in a town or a city, there's no reason why it wouldn't rip up a building or a house and just chuck it at whatever's annoying it. If there is a mage on a flying broom hitting it with a cantrip, I think it can knock it off of whatever it's flying on, or at least hit it with whatever's available. And I feel like it is mighty enough to do that. Also, you might give it a jump attack, right? Not necessarily a jump attack, but the ability to jump. You can look at monsters like the Bolé to kind of get an indication of how far you think a Tarrasque could jump. And, maybe it surprises the players by being able to jump farther than they expected. They're like, I'm 60 foot up. It only has a reach of 20 or 30 feet or whatever it is. And then you give it a 30-foot leap. And then, oh no, next thing you know, they're in its mouth. And then, fly that, buddy.
Yeah, so there's definitely ways that you can go to kind of outrange, things that are there. Now, yes, if you look at all of the different build mechanics to increase the range of your spells, and you stay at the absolute threshold of your, distant spell nonsense of your cantrip, yeah, you could be able to do it. But, this thing is going to try and find a way to either get closer or move out of your range until you come close enough to do something on it.
Right, and that's where you're going to look at, like, how far can giants throw things? And also, they might not initially expect it anyway, so they might be close. They might think they're safe, but they're not. So we've mentioned a couple things that are tactical in nature, and then we mentioned a couple things that are mechanical in nature. Now, there's another solution that is a bit newer and wasn't available when the Tarrasque was first created for 5e D&D.
And what is that?
That's going to be Mythic Actions, making it a mythic monster. It was, I believe it was Theros. Was it Theros guide?
Mythic Odysseys of Theros.
Mythic Odysseys of Theros. They introduced this idea of mythic monsters. What's more mythic than the Tarrasque? And basically, that's when you lower it to 0 hit points, but then it comes back. This is not my final form style, right? And it has new abilities that it can use, new powers it can use. Maybe you kind of build it and just make it a normal Tarrasque, and then some of these extra things like leaping attacks and roar attacks is part of the mythic kit that it can then use.
That's a great, direction. And whether you want to add on those kind of things or pay attention to everything that was done to it in order to bring it down. And that is what allows it to essentially transform. Oh, you're hitting it with Sacred Flame and Acid Splash. Okay, well now it not only is immune to those damage types, but has abilities like breath weapons or, what have you, that release and, shoot those kind of damage types out. Well, if your caster is all about doing acid damage, they might be immune or resistant to it. But if this thing is hurling, 8d6, acid, vomits, out to 300 feet, that's going to be considerable and eventually eat through your spellcaster.
Well, that too, one of the things is it can swallow things, and then they take acid damage from stomach acid. So I don't think it regurgitating that bile is that unbelievable. And also, if you've ever watched a monster movie, it's especially like Godzilla and King Kong, they're like, oh no, he's down. But then something happens, they get their second wind, and they begin fighting again, and it's as if nothing happened before. So the Mythic Mythic Actions would totally work. Some of the things you mentioned are interesting from a DM perspective that may not work from a design perspective, as far as if you were recreating the Tarrasque to put in a monster book, because you're not going to know, as a designer, you don't know all the variables at every single table.
Right.
But you might be able to design something with some considerations like, whatever thing was the thing that finally took it down to make its mythic action take effect, it's immune to that kind of damage now, or something similar.
Right. There's talk and speculation, and then there's actually design. So sometimes when we talk about things, it's meant to more kind of guide, those of you out there for your own individual home tables. But not all of that is absolutely going to be able to be put into a design situation.
So what do you folks think? Have you guys got a Tarrasque at your table? Maybe we'll even put a link down to Amazon or something so you guys can check it and get it. It is a fantastic mini.
If you enjoy all the Nerdarchy content, why not come check us out on Nerdarchy the store or support us on Patreon?
Let us know if you used the Tarrasque in your games and what your solutions were, or did you just use it the way it was and your players curb stomped the Tarrasque?
While you're down there, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, even go ahead and attune to that notification bell.
Quick reminder, we drop several videos a week, so come on back, but you can't wait till then. No worries, we got you covered. Using massive monsters to mash your D&D party.
So until next time,
Stay nerdy.